to another Shawn Soole. I am always excited for my guests, but today I'm really excited. I finally got an opportunity to nail down some time to speak to the legendary David Wondrich, probably one of the most prolific researchers and authors I think in my generation. So many things just changed when Imbibe. Sorry, I'm doing the usual Facebook thing that I talked about last week. So many things changed when he put out Imbibe, and I really want to get down to the nuts and bolts. And of course, we're going to talk about the brand new book, The Oxford Companion of Spirits. I think that's the full title, but it's a massive tome, and it's going to be your encyclopedia for any bartender who wants to learn about literally anything. There's some crazy stuff in this one. And so, welcome. Thank you for taking some time. I know you've been busy.
My pleasure, Shawn. It's nice to see you, I have to say.
So have you been traveling a lot with the book and everything, or has travel still been sort of stunted a little bit for you?
It's definitely been stunted. I was just out in San Francisco, though, and I was in Pittsburgh. I mean, just random. Normally, I would be blanketing the country as much as I could do that on my own, but or with my co-editor Noah Rothbaum or my associates. But right now, it's hard to travel and concerning in a lot of places, and it just there's just a lot more resistance in the system, and a lot of that's coming from me, frankly. I don't.
Yeah,
there are a lot of places I love them dearly, but I'm going to.
Yeah, there's been a couple of times people are like, "Oh, you want to come to San Francisco for this or this?" And I'm like, and the Canadian border is still a little bit weird when it comes to traveling to the US and stuff. It's just a lot. But I'm really curious about this.
There's a lot of grit in the system, you know.
There is. I've been really curious because this is something that I always do for every episode, but your origin story is very different, and I've heard bits and chunks of how you got into this sort of field but how did you get into it in your own words? How did you get into the world of cocktails and spirits and everything like that?
Well, I always kind of had an interest in cocktails and spirits because I was an American teenager in the 1970s, for one thing. I like to read, and I always loved like Raymond Chandler books where Marlowe sitting at a gloomy bar drinking a lovingly described gimlet, even though it sounds actually like crap to me now. Or P.G. Woodhouse books where Jeeves shimmers in the morning with his hand. And I always just thought that stuff was amusing and cool. And to drink legally or look like I could was living in suburban New York, and I spent a lot of time in the city, and I'd go to bars and I was money, so that meant drinking in old man bars. And I learned the best thing to drink there was a martini or a scotch and soda, drinks the bartender knew how to make, that your idiot buddies were ordering woo-woos and melon balls and stuff like that. And the bartenders were rolling their, slamming them down on the bar. But if you go and order a dry gin martini, the bartender rolls it up in a second and is like, okay, he knows how to drink. I'm not going to, enemy here. And
I'm not going to sass him too much.
Well, plus, yeah. Also, a world that has capita more alcohol in it than a dry martini. No mixed drink, especially like they made them better. So I learned my lesson for that too. But so I always had the sort of this background. Then fast forward a good 20, and I'm a junior English professor and fairly miserable in my job. I had dropped out of that finally, went back to college, then went on to school and got a teaching job, which you were supposed to be happy about, and I really wasn't. I started writing about music on the side, like jazz and music and rhythm and blues and stuff like that. Village Voice here in New York, and for the New York Times Sunday Magazine and entertainment section. And that one. So one day at the end of 1999, a friend of mine, Josh Mack, who worked for First Magazines in their new internet division, which was new and shiny. The only problem was they had zero content for their magazines. And Esquire website had an old cocktail book that they wanted to pissed was the real story. So they're all right, you boys, let's cut you guys off at the knees and put this thing up online. So Josh calls me up and said, "Is that the sort of thing you can do? Edit this thing? I know you like cocktails, and I had a couple of cocktail books. I was for a home mixologist at the time. I was about average. I wasn't great at it. I'd never worked as a bartender, but I had worked in bars for 10 years as a musician. So I knew, the operation of bars and the atmosphere and how to behave and all that. But I'd never worked behind the bar. So he asked me if I can do this. And my initial answer was no. Do you know how busy I am? Junior English professors are always really busy. But then he mentioned that it paid $3,000, and here I was with a 2-year-old at home and a junior English professor, and that was a lot of money. So I said, well, it is Christmas break now, and I'll take a crack at it. So I started doing this just about the time that Milk and Honey opened in New York, and in about 6 weeks, this site was up and running. And the editor I worked with there said, those little essays you put in front of some of the drinks, because of course I didn't just do the book, I rearranged it and, got all professory on it. And he said, those little essays, can you do one of those every week for a different cocktail? Until the cocktails in this thing, the Esquire Drinks database, we called it, until they all have those essays. And I was like, sure, I guess. And he says, we'll pay you. And then of course I could do it. And I used to write them on the Staten Ferry on my way home from work teaching in Staten Island. I would write my little columns, and I got a notebook and got all the drink books I could get my hands on. Started comparing recipes and comparing stories. And I know you and I discussed this, that you were doing the same thing. I mean, that was all you could do. I did have the internet, which was new and not very helpful, but it was somewhat helpful, and it got every year it got more helpful.
Yeah, I remember the forums and stuff back in those days. Like, we don't really have them anymore, but like you'd go on and you'd post a thing and someone would post a photo of a recipe or something like that. What year was the Esquire cocktail book that you were editing up? What year was that from?
49 book. It was the Esquire Handbook for Hosts, and it was a cool little book.
Hadn't published anyone before that.
They
hadn't published anything, have they?
Published a paperback one. No, that was their first book. Before, in 1938, they published Esquire Intelligencer, a very, I do have their paperback, like little ring-bound, celluloid ring-bound booklet. They did that first, and then every 10 years or so after that, they did another cocktail book. But they stopped in the early 1980s, and they didn't do one in the 90s. After I'd been doing the column for maybe 8 months or a year, I went to David Granger, the editor-in-chief. Fortunately, gave me a meeting, and I said, Esquire used to do these books. Why don't we do a new one? People are interested in cocktails again. And he said, huh. But he had been a bartender, and he was a very smart guy. And he looked around and he said, all right, we'll give it a try. So then we did Esquire Drinks, which was still a fun book, I think. It's very Esquire-y, but it's amusing.
So taking that leap into the drinks writing and cocktails and that sort of thing, what was your first like big experience at a bar? Because like, as you said, Milk and Honey just opened in 1999. That was one of the very first like other than the Rainbow Room with Dale DeGroff and Audrey Saunders were coming up through that time as well. Like, what was your first experience instead of being the outside looking in and writing about it, actually jumping into the pool and actually experiencing it?
Well, I guess it helped that I'd been a musician. I realized I didn't want to be one of the writers who every time they have a question about a drink, they have to call up and you'll get a different answer every time. I figured I should learn better how to mix these drinks, and it helped in I guess it was in 2000. Jonathan Downey, the Esquire, call it the drinks columnist Esquire, was a fan of my study one, so he brought me over for the opening of Milk and Honey London, and I spent a week hanging out with Dale DeGroff, which was amazing and really, friends forever since. And Dale is my mentor, and watched him and asked him questions, mixing drinks, practiced a lot. The Rainbow Room before I got this, and I'd been to a number of famous cocktail bars. I do, all ones in New York, certainly, and Bemelman's Bar, the 21 Club, Grange Hall with great Del Pedro behind the bar, who now has a lovely bar near Brooklyn, Tooker Alley. And I knew, I was an aficionado of the art, let's say. I liked to go, but I started to, practice, gave up the old 3-piece cobbler shaker, and learned how to use a mixing glass, and learned how to stir a cocktail. And years there, I was doing this, several times a year at least. And I won't say it made me into a great bartender, but it taught me the difficulty of the job and to appreciate a great one when I see one.
Yeah, I always find I have a lot of regulars. I have a lot of regulars who sit at the bar and enjoy cocktails that we make, and then they go off and do a wedding, and they offer to bartend because they're enthusiasts as well.
Right.
And then they come in the next week and they're like, "Your job's really hard. Like, it was a really tough. I did 5 cocktails on the menu, and I had to bust my butt to get all the drinks out for 100 people." And I'm like, "Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah.
What you think my job's easy? What are you talking about?"
No, I worked Mardi Gras shift once at Tooker Alley with Del Pedro, and the place was packed, and we were making Ramoses too. We were just, and that was fun. I mean, also we had a whole list of New Orleans drinks, but and no complaint. I will gladly make you a Ramos even when I'm busy, because it's such a drink, and I don't mind hustling and doing the work. But that's because I don't have to do it.
So we've got a comment on from Facebook from Drahos. He's a bartender based out of Montreal. How many copies of the Bon Vivant's Companion do you have at home?
Well, I've got 5 or 6, but of the first edition, but none of them are original. I don't have an original first edition, because no matter how many I make in this world, the first edition goes up in price until it's just out of my range. When I started, it was only a few $100s, but I didn't have that.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's many thousands of dollars, and that's so.
Yeah.
I do have the very rare second
eBay. I think I saw one on eBay years ago. I saw one on eBay years ago, and it started off like a couple of $100, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's cool. I might put a bit in for that."
Yeah.
And then within 24 hours before the close, it was at like 4,500, and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not paying. My wife will kill me if I pay $4,500 for a book." So let's
never in my life worth it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think I picked up a first edition Ted Saucier bottoms up for like $90 when I was at Tails a few years ago.
Now, when I bought my copy, it was $25, and $90 would have extensive consultation with my wife, but things have gotten a little better, thank God. Yeah, let's move ahead. Sure.
Let's push forward. What year did Imbibe come out? Because Imbibe was like the very first, I feel, for a lot of bartenders in my generation, that first aha moment of like a book that compiled absolutely everything about the history and the knowledge of the cocktails that we all learn. And I was saying off camera to you is like, we believed in all these stories because they were very romantic. Cocktail stories or history stories are always very, very romantic. But then you do some research and you're like, oh, it's not as romantic as you thought. When did Imbibe come out?
That came out in 2007. And, I think often they are romantic. They're just different. You need to dig into the histories of the people involved. And some of these people are amazing and very cool. It's just harder to dig up the history. The stories are easy to find. I mean, that's basically why I wrote the book. Is there was so much circular talk in both in person and on cocktail chats, right, at the time, about like the histories of these drinks, and it would just go round and around in circles without ever settling anything. And somebody would come in and then say the same old tired story over again, and everybody else would say, well, go 3 of this discussion and you'll see we've already gone over that 2 times. I thought, let me try to get to the bottom of some of these stories, or at least find evidence, and also let me get the original recipes out of Jerry Thomas's book and the other books of the time. It turned out I kind of widened my and put those in there unaltered, because the other thing is half the people were arguing. They were arguing, said, the recipe calls for this. No, it calls for that. It's because they were using different versions of it from other writers and not the original one. And they all thought they were using Jerry Thomas's recipe, but they weren't. So let's I guess that book is to try to establish a baseline. Here's the actual facts that we know, and if we don't know, but here's the actual recipe that Thomas or Harry Johnson or one of these other people wrote, and that much at least nobody can argue about.
Mm-hmm. So with that, I remember a story that I think it was written about when the aviation, you found the first listing for the aviation. And I remember, I think it was, you found this old Hugin Ensslin book, and you were reading it while you were having breakfast, and you dropped your spoon into your cereal because you were reading the book as you were reading it, and you realized that you just found the first known listed recipe for the aviation.
Yeah, this is actually, it was lunch and it was soup, which is even worse because I almost dropped the book into the soup. I was like, holy shit. Because at the time, the aviation, this was like, 2005, something like that. Aviation was a hot drink back then. Everybody was, it was like this. When you walked into a bar and you saw a bottle of and a good section of gin and asked for an aviation, and they didn't blink an eye, on your people, so it was really good. That was like, okay, it's like the speakeasy password, and then you could ask them for weird drinks, and you knew that they wouldn't like complete. That was the theory anyway. But yeah, I found that this recipe, this book I'd never heard of, and it was pretty obscure at the time. And I bought it online for about $75, which was a lot. And I found not only that, but all these other drinks that had been in the Savoy book, and that was just an eye opener for me. It's like, oh, there's like an American source, the Savoy book. only source I'd really recognize ABC of cocktails from Paris. And so this one was like, oh, there's a New York source for this from before Prohibition, because Craddock took a lot of Enslin's drinks and put them in his book. But in the aviation that Craddock printed, he left out this creme de violette that was in the other one. Then I went back and looked through my other books, and I found that recipe. It was available, but it looked like a wrong recipe. It had no source, and it looked like just another weird recipe. And that was in Gavin Duffy book. I'm trying to look through my books here, but so in his book from the early 30s, he had that Hugo Enslin recipe for the with creme de violette, but nobody paid attention, myself included, because it was later and it was weird. But the hard part is when you try to make that recipe, because that takes a lot of balancing, and most people who make it don't balance it very well, I think, and it just ends up tasting like hand soap. It's got to the point where I prefer the one with maraschino, because oh boy, I had way too much creme de violette and too much maraschino. But I mean, that's one of those. When I make that, it's like a half an ounce of lemon juice, no more, a spoon and a half of maraschino, maybe half a bar spoon of violette, and a good 2 ounces of Plymouth gin. Something like that will work. But beyond that, it gets very tricky. That could be a really hard drink. Once people are putting in like a half an ounce of maraschino, that's all you're ever going to taste, I think.
Yeah, we're right now we have
really
right now at Clive's we've actually got a mezcal and tequila. So like you choose. You can have a mezcal aviation or tequila aviation. And the mezcal aviation is very, very popular. I know it's very hipster of me, but the mezcal aviation is very, very popular.
If it's at Clive's, it's going to be delicious. That I've learned in life.
So with this amount of history and soon with all this history and knowledge you have, you've helped recreate and relaunch spirits that, like as you said, the creme de violette. Like creme de violette 10 years ago was really tough to get. So even maraschino to a degree was really tough to get regularly. So like if you, as you said, it's a sort of a secret word to get into a speakeasy. So how many products have you helped recreate now? I know that there's the Pierre Ferrand Dry Curacao is a great one. You also did the cognac with them as well. The Pierre Ferrand cognac as well. A little. Ransom?
Ransom Old Tom gin, the Emerald whiskey. I helped certainly materially with Smith and Cross rum and with Arak van Oosten. I've helped various people with peach brandies, none of which have really taken off because it turns out it's really hard to make peach brandy. It's just in basis. Plantation OFTD. Plantation Stiggins Fancy Pineapple Rum. I know there are others. Those are Chieftain with over here at New York Distilling Company, which is a Geneva style gin, and I'm sure there are a couple others that are just not springing immediately to mind. But there's a bunch of stuff. It's all stuff that I don't take money for this work. It's all stuff that I'm interested in, that I want to see happen, and sometimes all they need is somebody to talk it over with. Other times maybe a little more substantial help, but mostly it's just encouragement. If you make this, you will find people who will appreciate it, and That's pretty much been true. It's been surprising with some.
Yeah, it's one thing with the dry curacao. I remember doing the seminar at Tails a few years ago, and I was making my own curacao because back then, I think sometimes the younger kids, and I say kids, like I've got two kids who are 22 and 24 working my bar right now, and they get upset that they can't get a certain style of random bitters or a certain liqueur that the US has. And I'm like, I remember when
Yeah.
China came to Canada. I remember when China came to Canada. I remember when Basil Hayden's was launched in Canada, and now it's like, and I remember the dry curacao seminar, and I was bringing in cases of curacao oranges to Clive's and soaking them in brandy and making and sweetening it. I didn't know how it was supposed to taste at the end, but I knew it was going to be like a bitter orange and that sort of thing. And it was the walnut that goes into the dry curacao that I was just like, oh, that's the missing piece right there. But
Oh
then the
yeah.
dry curacao hit BC, and yeah.
Nobody on earth knows more about like traditional distillers practice. Alexander Gabriel, he learned so many different kinds of distilling, and he's got this just collection inside of his mind of ways of doing things, and that one blew my mind too. But what led to that project here in New York, I'd done a curacao session, and for that I distilled my own curacao following a 1960. And I brought a little bit of it to for Alexander to taste it, and it was much more bitter than the modern orange liqueurs. Not like bitter, but it had an edge. And he said, "Oh, I could do that." And so we talked back and forth, and he sent me some samples, and it ended. That's because out and out bitter, but it's not just orange flavor. It has these layers of flavor. So when you put it in something, you taste the drink and you don't go, oh, orange. You taste the drink and you go, wow, that's rich. I think that's a pretty traditional way of doing these things, because these on their own, and it really it worked very well, I think, and I'm a dedicated of that stuff. But it started out, I had this little 5-liter pot distilling pisco to get a really high proof grape spirit base, and then some of that I redistilled with orange peels. Then I made a final infusion with fresh peels and blended the two, on and on. And follow distillers manuals that I'd been looking through, these French distillers manuals. So it was very fun. Unfortunately, I don't kind of thing anymore as much as I would like, but
so let's talk about what I got you on the show for. The Oxford Companion just got released. Was it 10 years in the making? I read that somewhere. There was like 10 years in the making to get to it. And it's like, how many pages is it?
It's 860 pages, large pages, double column, small print. It's a lot. I signed the contract to do it in 2012. So discussing it, for a little while before that. So it took a long time. For several reasons, but one of them was it wasn't paying me a salary every month. That I had to do actual work, and so it meant that I'd have to clear a window and work like mad on this thing, and then go back and do work for a few weeks, and then clear another window and then work on this. So it took a good amount of time, but also a big part of that was dealing with history of spirits and history of cocktails and all that, because there are new sources coming available online that you can that changed the history of a lot of these things. You know, suddenly, bartender types of distillation that still I thought was universal. Turns out that's not universal at all. There are other kinds of stills that people use that we have forgotten in the modern world, and that it hasn't been in the interest of the distilling industry to talk about because they're not using them. And the older brands like to say we've never changed anything, and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of new research that needed to be incorporated, and then the 1,100 some plus entries needed to be made to pull together, to sing in chorus rather than each singing its own song separately. I didn't need to completely redo them, but I had to make adjustments here and there so that when you're being sent from one entry to the other, it's not just head spinning, but this person says this, that person says that, and they're completely different. You need to kind of say it may be this, it may be that, and get things pulling together. And that took just a lot of time. That was a lot.
Well, because you had a lot of contributors. Like I helped contribute as well, but you had a lot of contributors, and you sort
did,
of really,
indeed, and
you put out a big net to get everybody to sort of think. So obviously, it's everybody's different voices that you got to try and mold into one book that actually reads like it's one person.
Yeah, or at least it's not a herd of cats. A pack of dogs is better. Each has their own bark, but they're all running in the same direction and chasing you. So that was kind of what we were aiming for. Yeah, we had over 150, over 160 contributors.
Wow.
Which is a lot. People, bartenders like you, we had writers like Dave Broom, we had distillers like Don Livermore, we had all these people, Austin, Audrey Saunders, Diana Sanders, who writes great cocktail histories, did some of our cocktail histories. We went to people we knew the topics and had expertise, and when we couldn't get them, we found other people who knew how to work their way around it and put things together and find things. So it worked out. It worked out. Ultimately, it was just a lot of management and just ultimately a mountain of work, which is finally now pretty much behind us.
Do you think it's done? Do you think that it'll be something that you'll update on every half decade or so? Or do you think that you've covered as much as possible in the book?
We've covered as much as possible, but I think it should be updated. Partly because this is the first one, and only in one piece can you see how to efficiently do it better. You could see room for improvement. You look at it first. Once you see that, then this is kind of the shop floor model, and then the production model. The next one, you can combine things that probably should be combined. You can separate things that should probably be separated. There are cases where new information is coming online every month, where we're going to learn a lot of new. Even since the manuscript was finalized, I've learned new facts on things, and hopefully we'll get them into a thing. I found what's probably the correct inventor of the White Lady cocktail, for instance. There's stuff like that, and there's just all kinds of corrections like that. It's just, there's new information, and we try to give the accurate and up-to-date information we can. We tried to have sources for everything. We tried to back everything up. Obviously obviously sometimes slips through the cracks, but on the whole, it's been pretty carefully checked, and there are bibliographical sources for every entry. The most important ones are listed right there, so you can go and look. And I think that's important too.
Do you think with the amount of information that's out there on the internet and that sort of stuff, obviously things have definitely changed since Imbibe came out. Do you think we're getting to the peak where we are going to know where all these things come from? Like, obviously, you just said, like, you just found out about who actually created the White Lady. Do you think that we're going to tap out a lot of these history notes, or do you think it's always going to be evolving? You get new information from some random, like someone finds a menu at an old hotel that's been around for 120 years, and obviously that's going to change things up. Do you think we're getting to the peak?
I think we're probably, a bell curve. Much new information is found every year. We're probably over the top of the curve already with cocktails and in particular, in terms of our searchable, in terms of all that stuff, we're reaching into diminishing returns already. And there's always going to be some stuff, but in general, a lot of this stuff, if it hasn't been found now, there's a good chance it's never going to be findable, because it just didn't get written down, or if it did, that where it got written down lost. And definitely, there's a lot like that. We know about important lost documents, and I suspect a lot of this stuff will just never ultimately be truly knowable. You can build circumstantial cases, and there are always some people who are never going to believe that and stick with the old myths because they don't quite right there. So and so invented this drink under circumstances. That thing didn't really get written down. There wasn't a lot about bartenders or drinks in the 19th century when most of our canonical drinks, or at least the families of canonical drinks, got launched. Even stuff that got launched later, like the margarita. There are 5 credible stories for the origin of the margarita. Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a good friend who worked at the Hotel Georgia, and obviously the Hotel Georgia cocktail, very popular in Vancouver. Ted Saucier's first listing, first mention of the dry shake, that sort of thing, which may be wrong now, but that's how I saw it. And he went into like the archives of the hotel looking for an old menu that listed the Hotel Georgia somewhere, and he couldn't. He went deep into the hotel archives and couldn't find any menus or anything like that.
I mean, that's the kind of thing that will turn up for tuning on eBay someday. Somebody was going through their grandparents' stuff, and there's a box of menus. I've got more stuff out of menus and ephemera. Jeff Barry and I are both like kind of ephemera fiends. I have a selective but fairly deep collection, for instance, of Mexican cocktail menus from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Why? Because I'm really curious about, trying to pin down the origin of the margarita. And do any of these help? No. However, are they very cool? Yes, they are. They've got other drinks, just not the margarita. So, there's a lot of stuff like that. Some stuff we'll continue to find. And just in surprising places, and other things are just going to continue to elude us, unfortunately. I guess that's as should be, though.
Yeah. So I know this is going to be a hard question. I thought I was going to do a versus, but do you have a favorite author from back in the day, like your Hugo Anslins, your Jerry Thomases, your Harry Johnsons? Usually some people are in the Jerry Thomas or Harry Johnson camp. They usually, like, it's one or the other, like Harry Johnson, the first bartending book, first cocktail book. Who's your favorite? Who's the one that you're like, oh, this guy knew his stuff?
Well, I'm going to, stick Thomas, because he was such an extraordinary character. I mean, he tended bar with a bowler hat on and 2 pet white rats frolicking on his shoulders and hat while he did it. Come on. The bar had a shooting gallery in the basement where you shot against attractive young ladies, and you put your money down and they beat you every time, making you put more and more money down. You were sitting there enjoying his fine cocktails. I mean, come on, just the wildness. So I'll always be in the Jerry Thomas camp on that. But other authors, I'm a big fan of George Sainsbury, who wrote Notes on a Cellar Book, which has all kinds of just useful stuff and fun talk about, and I mean, a lot about wine, but all about spirits that he's known and that he's appreciated. There's so many people. Kingsley Amis, crotchety son of a bitch, but very funny, on make friends' wives think that you're just while keeping your friends from the good stuff in your cabinet. There's all kinds. It's just very amusing, and I tend to like the stuff that's amusing. There are also some great bar books that are underappreciated. There's this guy, A.T. Neirath from Germany, who wrote Rund die Bar, Around the Bar, in German, which is a book with a detailed but completely wrong history of cocktails at the beginning, and then but detailed, and then it goes on, and it's got all this stuff about his cocktails and drinks and Tool, bartending, and it's just this amazing, written around 1932, and it's this amazingly detailed, comprehensive bartender's guide that I wish somebody would translate and put out, because it's a very cool book, and there's a lot of.
Yeah, I have a catalog, I think, from the 1920s. It was a reprint, but it's a catalog of like hotel and restaurant supplies, and some of the cool, one that you could actually buy, like a prefab bar to slide in that looks, it's been pulled straight out of Harry Johnson's book. There's one that's a mixing spoon that you just push the top, and the bottom spins. So you just do this, and it's a stir spoon, and just some great stuff like muddlers and strainers and just epic stuff, and I love it.
Well, that's another, Oxford Companion. We've got a lot of vintage barware on the cover, photo, and also we've got several pages of beautiful color photos of vintage bar gear, because one of my vintage bar gear, and I have a big collection of it, and like bartend gear, and so we made sure to put as much of that stuff as possible in. Those kinds of catalogs are great over the years to collect a fair amount of the stuff, which is, a lot of it I just use every day when I'm making drink, because it's great. Some of it not so good, but the good stuff is great. Made, solid, durable, beautiful, attractive, elegant bar gear, and there was so much of it for a while there.
So I'm not going to take up too much more of your time. The drink that you drink the most of, what's the cocktail of choice of David Wondrich?
Well, I usually make something, when I'm home at the end of every working day, I'll go downstairs and mix up a drink for my wife Karen and me, and usually it'll be something in the Martini/Manhattan family, something with vermouth or fortified wine, a spirit, some bitters, maybe a bar spoon of this or bar spoonful of that. And it doesn't usually have a name, but usually kind of, what do I feel like? As you freestyle a drink. Not hard once you made thousands of drinks, other one. And what have we got? What seems good? What goes with what? And there you go. I mean, the most recent one I came up with for the new collaboration between Leopold Brothers, their Wild Three Chamber Still rye whiskey, which is a pre-prohibition style of rye whiskey that they had to have a still made for,
Wow.
of a design not seen in use in decades. It's a blend of George Dickel rye made by Nicole Austin at Dickel, and they asked me to come up with a cocktail for that. So this rye has these kind of floral and like notes. Like, it's really kind of unique tasting, and I didn't want to step on the subtlety, so I mixed that with Bianco vermouth, like 2 parts rye, 1 part other than like a red vermouth, so sweet white vermouth. A bar spoonful of brown creme de cacao, which sounds crazy, but it gives flavor without a lot of aromatics, so that the aromatics were still from the rye. And then there's a Peychaud's bitters. I mean, that's kind of what I'll make. So that's probably when I'm mixing drinks, that's what I like to mix.
That's awesome. So give one more big plug to the book, The Oxford Companion, and well, all your books. You've got, how many have you done now? You've got Esquire, Imbibe, Punch, and which we didn't even talk about, and then The Oxford Companion.
Yeah, and then a Killer Cocktails book. I've got the book I wrote about music called Stomp and Swerve. I've got this Esquire Drink Like a Man book that unfortunately came out the same month that my editor for it was fired and that I quit the magazine. They just kind of let that one disappear. But that's actually ultimately titled, which we do explain. It's actually a pretty pleasant book, a lot of good stuff in it. So there's a small stack of books there, and getting bigger all the time.
But if you're a young bartender and you want to get Oxford Companion, is it available on Amazon and all the usual spots and places?
It is .org. It's in bookstores. It's sometimes a little bit of trouble with orders, partly just because supply chain issues that everybody's experiencing now. But it is very much available, and it's a big fat book with it's Oxford Companion to Spirits and Cocktails, the history of spirits, technology and techniques of distilling, histories of cocktails, of famous bartenders, of famous bars, all kinds of stuff. It's a big book of everything. So hopefully you'll find it and find it amusing.
And I know that usually I end with people telling everybody, but I know you're not massive on social media. You only have Twitter, don't you? Or do you have Instagram as well?
But I'm pretty active on it. So come and find me on Twitter.
Well, thank you so much for your time, David. This has been an absolute pleasure. I know that one of the highlights of my whole career was when you were in Victoria in 2013. Yes, and you were sitting with Philip Duff at Little Jumbo after I just opened it up during Art of the Cocktail, and I actually got to sign a book for you, which is just one of a dreams come true.
I treasure that book.
This is a dream come true, really.
Absolute time. It was great to be in Victoria, a city I hadn't been to. Now I will always want to come back to, because it's a lovely place and it has great cocktail bars. So I can't find you again. Thank you so much for having me here. And
thank you so much,
just
David.
you. Thank you. Cheers.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, buddy. Bye.
Pleasure.